Hello and welcome to a Team More Robotics event recap. On February 21st and kind of on February 14th, I competed with my beetle weight combat robot Deadite at Motorama and RABID's Cupid Carnage. Deadite is my first attempt at a 3-pound or beetle weight combat robot, which is the smallest weight class you'll see at NHRL. The initial plan was to build one for last year's Motorama, but I didn't have time and turned it into a suck bot instead. I finally built one in time for this year's event, and the design process actually went very smoothly. I had very little experience building beetle weight bots besides just putting the SSP electronics together for the Roomba, and I used all the same parts in Deadite. It was very easy to assemble. My only real experience with this weight class was Slice Post 31 at the Hive, which was 2 plastic ants with a bunch of metal screwed on, so that didn't really give me much knowledge on how to construct a good 3-pound robot. I didn't exactly know what to expect in terms of durability and how I needed to design the robot in order to be durable because I'm so used to ant weights. By now I know ants and plastic ants very well. I know generally what thickness of materials will and won't hold up and what kinds of designs might be optimal due to my 1.5 years of experience refining my 1-pound robots. Durability was still a big question, but for the most part testing went very well for Deadite as the weapon seemed very effective. It drove great, and I didn't really have to change much of anything because it didn't destroy itself or function poorly like robots sometimes do in the testing phase. The only issues were the saw cutting its weapon motor wires and the saw falling off and cutting through the temporary TPU top plate, but these were easy fixes, just putting screws in to hold the wires in the arm and tightening the saw down better. Speaking of saw, Deadite is an overhead saw bot, which I've always wanted to make. Mako is my favorite robot that currently competes, and I've been to many events with Doomslug, a great ant-weight saw bot that I love watching. It's so fun seeing a robot cut into its opponent, and I wanted to try it out myself. I had a saw with very jagged teeth, which cut way better than I expected, but it seemed like it could be a little more self-destructive, and it doesn't look very durable. A couple of the teeth came off in testing. I also got 4 more grinding style saws, which take a little more time to cut, but still worked very well and would be a lot more durable. To set myself apart from other saw bots, I wanted to try an over-the-top armor setup. I had the idea to make a metal fork config where the whole robot's chassis is surrounded by TPU forks so that it would be very hard for any robots to hit the chassis or anything important. I also made an anti-horizontal attachment with lots of TPU flaps to absorb hits where even if it got torn up, my opponent couldn't reach anything important, and hopefully I could slow the spinner down and pin them to bring down the saw. Another design element I tried out was air gap armor. The backside has a thin TPU wall, creating a gap between this wall and the chassis. With the carbon fiber bottom plate, a hit to the backside would hopefully damage only the material in this gap and protect everything important on the inside of the bot. I also had a lot of weight to work with, so I could layer carbon fiber, aluminum, and TPU on the top and bottom of the robot as I saw fit. For the theming, I was going to call it Xenomorph, but then someone beat me to that name, and I went with Deadite, which is the name of the demonic entities from the Evil Dead franchise. That franchise has movies that are so wildly different in tone, but so consistently great. I haven't seen the 2013 one yet, so tell me if that's good. It used to hold the record for most fake blood ever used in a movie. The weekend before Motorama, I was going to compete at RABID's Cupid Carnage event with my usual bots, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to test Deadite a little more than just in my test box cutting stuff. If you remember one of the summer macro events, I fought in a rumble with a plastic beetle, or pleatle, so I decided to bring Deadite to RABID for a plastic beetle rumble. This would be a great way to see if it could hold up to a full 3 minutes of driving and using its weapon, and if it couldn't hold up to itself or plastic ants, it definitely couldn't handle other beetles. I already had TPU parts for everything except the weapon, so I printed a little TPU bar, which really wouldn't do much damage, but it would still be fun. The rumble was against 6 plastic ants, which are each 1/3 of the weight of Deadite, and a Chinese hexbug knockoff driven by Corey from Rabbid. The plants included Deathorang, Crabulon the Almighty, Error 417, Spurned Reminder, Monster 777, and Drumstick. Before the fight started, the driver Douglas told me not to pay any attention to which direction Drumstick was facing to start the fight. I wonder why that is. When the fight starts, of course I go straight after Drumstick. Fight! No! Who then hits the off button on the Chinese hexbug. Then I slam Monster, Crabulon, and Spurned Reminder into the wall, sending them flying, before bringing the weapon down onto Monster 777. Monster and Drumstick both get under the beetle, and I push into Deathorang. Spurned Reminder gets pinned, and Deadite does a little damage to the rubber band shreds. And then Monster 777 fully flips Deadite, followed by Drumstick doing the same thing. Spurned Reminder casually rips a piece off Deadite before a flying crab breaks things up. I pin Drumstick for some friction burns on its top plate, and scoop up Monster again with more grinding. Deadite joins the mega pin and then turns its attention to the poor Chinese Hexbug knockoff, where I rub a ton of yellow all over it.
Classic beetle going against the defenseless little thing in the corner.
Deadite smothers Monster 777 and switches which wall to pin it against, and I remember this was the first time I actually realized Error 417 was in the box, so I decided to hit it. Josh from Crabulon was yelling for someone to hit him, and I do, which sadly doesn't free him, but means Deadite officially hit every robot in the arena. Spurned Reminder goes ballistic while the projector gets put back into a decent position. Hitting the wheels of Spurned Reminder actually does some damage and tears off a rubber band, which was pretty fun to see. I push past Deathorang to grind into Drumstick's TPU armor, and get stuck for a bit when Monster 777 dies behind Deadite. Spurned Reminder kind of explodes and Drumstick's weapon broke, so it looked like it was Deadite versus Deathorang. Deathorang gets pinned and hit while the Chinese Hexbug knockoff inadvertently gets caught behind it. Sorry, Corey. I do it again and lightly scratch the top plate. I try to tear the entire drum out of Spurned Reminder, but the weapon can't actually do much damage, and the rumble ends after one more good moment of control. That was a very encouraging test for my new robot. It left the arena just as functional as it entered it, proving that it shouldn't just die for no reason, and it drove really well. The TPU weapon ground down and got little yellow bits all over everything, including itself. This was stuck all over the front. The wheels picked up some bits with the silicone I put on them, but it didn't seem to affect much driving-wise. Some of the plants tore up the armor a little bit, but not nearly enough to reduce functionality. But I'm impressed at how easily Spurned Reminder tore the big piece off the top. The extension on the arm that keeps the weapon from hitting the floor also had a little curl of plastic coming off. My TPU weapon may not have done anything important, but I did get to keep this top panel from Monster 777, which was worn down by the friction of Deadite's spinner. Since it was TPU on TPU, Drumstick's armor had a little cut in it, as well as a bunch of yellow dust that's now all crusted on there. Some stuck to his wheel. So that was a promising test, but it was time to see what would actually happen against other beetles. Going into Motorama, I thought I could potentially do pretty well, but it all depended on my matchups. I thought I was set up well to fight almost any style of robot, but I didn't want to fight any of the top contenders right away that you see frequently showing up to events like NHRL. There was a good mix of great proven competitors and the newer, less refined robots, so I was hoping for a good even matchup. My first ever beetle weight fight was against Impact.
Every single time. Every single time. Every single time. It is always him. When is it ever not him? First round, every time. It's right away. Always.
Going into the event, I had in my mind that this was literally the worst case scenario and the robot that I would least like to fight. I have a history of having to fight Lars either first round or very early on in the bracket, and I knew this would almost certainly be a loss. Impact is of course a Golden Dumpster winner and Motorama's winner from last year. It's an egg beater, which would be a good test for the thick forks. It would also be a good test for everything because this fight was definitely going to show how durable Deadite is. I was hoping to just last a while and maybe use the forks a few times. I'm going to do something I've never done before and just let the fight play before I analyze it.
In the blue square, we have Deadite. Deadite, are you ready? And in the red square, we have Impact. Impact, are you ready? Robots are ready. 3 minutes on the clock. Fight, robots. Whoa! Whoa!
Well, I think I lasted longer than Warp did. This is without a doubt the most extreme loss I've ever had. When the fight starts, Impact turns too far during the box rush and bounces off of Deadite. This must have been when this happened, but Lars showed me that he ran into my fork so hard that the carbon fiber bottom plate took a little bit of damage. Hey, I did something to him. The second hit also kind of goes my way with the forks holding him back when his weapon skips off of them. The armor also does its job protecting the important stuff and only allowing for a small hit. The forks work again, even getting Impact into the air for a little bit, but a hit from an angle flips Deadite over, which is all Lars needs to stay on top of me and break a drive side. Deadite hit the ceiling on this first big hit. He flips me again, and this is where stuff starts to come out, but this series of hits had a lot more going on than you might think. The first to come out is a drive motor and some TPU spacers, but then the hit to the saw knocks the battery loose, which he hits into the door. Then one more impact on the servo tears that out along with everything else that ended up falling out of the bot. After slowing it down, I can't even tell where the one drive motor came flying out, or exactly when the top plate was fully removed. It just fell from the ceiling at one point. The battery ended up falling in between the kick plate and the door, and it was damaged, so I had to find a sand bucket while they took all the parts out of the box. One motor was broken, the servo was broken, and the saw was bent and basically unusable, so I gave it to Lars. The aluminum top plate held up well even though it came off, and actually the damage wasn't as horrific as it might look in a way. The motor was a very easy drop-in replacement, and the servo was fairly easy to replace as well. Everything else really came down to only one issue, and that's the top plate. The way I hold it on is by setting nuts into the chassis and then solder welding a TPU nut over them to hold them down, which was clearly a very bad idea. They all ripped out, and all the other damage, the motor, the servo, the battery, came from everything dangling out of the robot. Basically, the only real problem was the top plate being so easy to remove. At the event, I did add much longer screws for my next fight to hopefully fix this a little bit. I did manage to repair everything in time, and this included replacing the whole weapon motor and arm because the heat from the motor made the screws go in too far, which ended up damaging it. That's another thing I need to change for V2. Unfortunately, my second opponent was essentially the same robot. It was Carmine, the 3-pound version of the classic dumpster-winning 12-pounder, Carmine. It's another egg beater, and it's really good, so I was very disappointed to have to fight another robot like this. The only things giving me hope were the fact that it wasn't Impact, and it lost its first fight by suddenly dying after delivering a hit. When the fight starts, Deadite immediately gets stuck in a damaged bit on the floor and gets popped back by Carmine. Another hit bends that same fork a bit after it was stuck up from the first one. I spin the saw after a brief moment where Carmine showed its back, but the drive was acting up pretty bad already for reasons that I still don't completely know. The forks do a great job keeping my opponent at bay, and I miss another saw attack. The forks continue to work exactly as I had hoped, as the arm wobbles with the spinning saw, and even when I take a hit, the flexible forks make sure no damage is really done. I just barely miss a hit from the saw, but instead cut into my own arm a little bit, and if the drive wasn't weird, I probably would have managed a pin or at least an actual cut. The AR500 forks continue to work well against an egg beater, and then Deadite takes the first big hit of the fight, followed by another that it holds up to very well. Look at how springy it is. It seems like this hit fixed the drive for a moment, allowing me to get fully under Carmine, but she gets off right before the saw comes down. However, after hitting the floor first, the saw makes contact with the front of my opponent, giving Deadite its first true hit with the saw. The sparks look really nice. It takes another hit very well, and you can tell Carmine was having a hard time lining up effective attacks, with all the forks keeping her at a distance. After making contact with the side of a fork, Carmine throws Deadite in the air, where the saw lands right on top of the egg beater, bending it and making it mostly useless.
That arm on Deadite is so funny looking. It's all wobbly. Oh! Now it's bent.
A good hit flips Deadite, but I self-right quick enough to avoid another one. I get thrown again, and the saw takes more abuse. Deadite gets completely high-centered, and you can see a bottom plate screw sticking out way too far, so that's my best guess as to why the drive was so bad. Pushing against the floor with my arm saves me, but the drive was even worse now. At least the armor design was working great, as Carmine has to get around the back to get a solid hit. I actually bring the saw down onto my opponent, but of course it wasn't spinning with how mangled it was. Deadite gets flipped again. I win an exchange with my fork and then lose one, getting popped into the air. I'm flipped again, and then the top plate starts to come off. Carmine lands an impressive 3-hit combination that tees Deadite up for the biggest hit of the match so far. The TPU bottom plate folds and totally messes up how the robot sits, and there goes a whole wheel with the motor attached. With nothing to lose, I throw the bent saw straight into her weapon, which goes a little better than I thought it would, but Carmine blasts a whole side of armor off right after that. At this point, taking more hits and looking like this, most people would tap out, but this is probably my last fight anyway, and I've never tapped out before, so I just keep driving. And Carmine has some reliability issues, so maybe it would just die and I'd somehow win. I swing the arm around as my only form of movement, and to my amazement, Deadite still drives even after all these never mind. I spin up the bendy saw and get flipped where the off-balance saw acts as the world's strangest wheel, spinning the whole robot into Carmine. At this point, of course, I can't move, but the servo still works and the robot still has power, as Deadite is counted out and eliminated from Motorama. In the Evil Dead movies, the only way to kill the Deadites is to completely dismember them, so at least both losses were on theme. I mean, it definitely hung in there for a while. The top plate had chunks removed, the left fork was bent down, but still usable if necessary. The other fork was beaten up, but also usable. The air gap back armor worked great because it took some hits but no major damage was done. A drive motor was ripped in half with the gearbox screws breaking off in the rest of the motor, and the shaft was broken off of it. The JST connector got pulled off of the other motor. The left side fork setup pulled through all of the TPU screw heads when it was removed, so I'll resize the holes. The saw cut into the arm a little bit, and the saw was bent in multiple places with various amounts of material removed from it in certain spots. I gave it to the driver of Carmine. I won't lie, this day was very disappointing. The level of power beetles have was way greater than I anticipated, and it's very different from ants. The worst part was that I fought two very similar robots, who were both some of the best ones there. Carmine got 4th, and Impact ended up winning the entire event. At least it's a great way to quickly find out what needs to be improved, but I would have liked to have seen what Deadite could do against a different type of robot, and one that was more on the same level. Looking back at it though, the fights were very entertaining, and the Carmine fight actually shows more promise than I initially thought. In fact, I'm barely gonna change anything for the next version, just using plastite screws to hold everything on properly. The armor setup worked exactly as I had hoped and prevented damage for a while. It did take Carmine a decent amount of time to get a real damaging hit on anything other than the forks. It might have been disappointing, but Deadite will be back and it will definitely be better. My plan is to take it to the June NHRL event and the Hive, but until then, I'll redesign it. I have plenty of recaps to catch up on, including the other beetle weight, drop shot, and I've been extremely active in the ant weight scene, so I have a lot of those too. Thank you for watching this event recap for my interesting first beetle weight event. Man, I was robbed of most destroyed. That was not nearly as bad as what happened to Deadite.